I like to start, I was going to start off this evening with telling you an idiom. An idiom is a sentence that doesn't mean what it says. And an idiom is kind of like telling a joke in a different culture, in a different language. It really doesn't always work. And so I got to thinking about that, and I want to share with you some idioms that I think are kind of funny. And then I'm going to share with you the idiom that is the purpose of the of this conversation before the message. So when I was in Holland, and I spent 11 years in the Netherlands, and I learned as much Dutch as I could in 11 years, which was not enough, but so I learned a bunch, and one of the things I learned was certain idioms. Sitting around in meetings, one of the first times I was in a meeting, someone said the equivalent in English of, he eats what runs out his nose. Yeah. How do you like to be sitting in a meeting, and you say, I hear those words, and all I can think of is the English words come to my mind. He eats what runs out his nose. And basically, that idiom means he kind of wastes his time. He just repeats the process. He doesn't get anything done. Anyway, that's what that one means. So I got a couple of three that I wanted you to see this evening. And here's the first one. This is just the English translation. This is not the Dutch words. But the first one is, it's as if an angel pees on your tongue. Paula was a little concerned that I share this in church tonight, but this is what it means. That's what it says. If you translate it literally, it says, it's like an angel pees on your tongue. Now, what do you think that means? Because we all know that there's a translation, but then there's a meaning. What does that mean? What would you think that means? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, really what it means is it tastes good. It's something that really, really tastes good. So I guess the fact that it's an angel makes it good. But I mean, I would never get that from that idiom. But here's another one. Here's another one from the Netherlands. To stand with your mouth full of teeth. What do you think that means? He's standing there with his mouth full of teeth. And that means you're speechless. You know, you're standing there and your mouth is wide open and you got no words in your mouth. All you've got are teeth. So he's standing there with his mouth full of teeth. And that makes sense, right? At least when you think about it like that. Here's one that kind of reflects the culture of the Netherlands a little bit. To be like herrings in a barrel. What do you think that means? No? Close. To be like herring. What have I said to you? We're packed in here like sardines. Okay. So you're crowded. You're crowded. So, and that's kind of makes sense when it's a fishing, seafaring kind of group, but that means it's a crowded place. Here's another one, and this is another one that kind of reflects their seafaring kind of nature, but to be between a wall and a ship. To be between a wall and a ship. What do you think? Tough spot, right. What would the English equivalent of that idiom be? There you go. So pastor's ahead. He gets 1 point. So, yeah, between a rock and a hard place. Have you ever heard that in English? I don't know. Anyway, so I got one more in Dutch, and that is to have an apple to peel with you. To have I have an apple to peel with you. Anyone? So again, I got a book that has 80,000 of these idioms translated into about 4 or 5 different languages, and that's the fun, is looking at them in different languages. And so in English, that one is, I have a bone to pick with you. Yeah. So there's a point of contention. We've got a problem here, and I want to talk to you about something that I don't feel good about. So, and the first time I heard that in Dutch, I thought, why would you say I have an apple to peel with you when you're really having a problem? And then I thought to myself, well, maybe even dumber is, why would you say I have a bone to pick with you? So it doesn't get any better in English. So I'm thinking, what are some idioms in Bahasa Indonesia? So you must have your own idioms, right? So here's one. This one I've heard before, so I know this one's probably correct. I won't try to pronounce it. My Bahasa Indonesia is not that good. So, but do you recognize that one? Let me see your hands. Who recognizes that one? Okay. So does that literally mean that there's a shrimp behind a rock? What it really means is, it does literally mean that, you're right, but what you're really saying is someone has an ulterior motive, right? Is that what you understand? So that's an idiom. Let's have another one. Here's one more from Bahasa Indonesia. That's a long one. I had not heard that one before, but I'm told, anybody recognize that one? Okay, so I'm told that one means no matter how well a squirrel can jump, it will eventually fall. See, that makes sense to me. And the meaning of that is even a great person has flaws. So that's what I've understood about that. One more on Bahasa Indonesia, and let's see if you get this one. I had never heard this one before. That's what I like about it. I like learning these new ones because they make a lot of sense when you figure out what they really mean. So the English translation to this one I understand is an ant across the sea is visible, an elephant on the eyelid is invisible. And basically what that means is when a person can see the flaws of others easily, but they don't see their own flaws. So those are idioms. And you got a lot of them, just like I do. So I looked for one more idiom, and in Bahasa Indonesia, and I couldn't find it. So I did the most dangerous thing you can do. I took the English words and put them in Google Translate and came up with a Bahasa Indonesia idiom, which is really always dangerous. You find out how poor Google Translate is when you do this. So see if you can figure out what this idiom is. What would that say? What? Okay, so what I was trying to get is and you got it. The English equivalent is he's preaching to the choir. He's preaching to the choir, which means you agree with me. You're not the one that needs to hear this because you're in agreement. And all of that to say this. The message this evening is always go to church. Yeah. That is the definitive example of preaching to the choir. Because you're here in church. You're in church. Why should I be telling you always go to church? Because the people that are not in church can't hear me. But I'm not saying you shouldn't do something different. I'm saying it's a good message to hear, even if you're in church. A lot of people have a lot of excuses for not going to church. You've heard a lot of them, Pastor. I bet you've heard your share over the years. One of them that's kind of current, modern, is I don't need to go to church because I hear a lot of preaching on Facebook all week. And to that I would say, I'm not sure that's very accurate preaching, so you might want to consider where you're listening to your preaching. Another example why people don't go to church is the pastor always uses me as a bad example. Pastor Dave said to me before the church, he asked Paula if she was nervous about me preaching, which means, and she wasn't, which means I haven't been using her in my examples enough because that's the job of a pastor's family is to be examples. But I don't know, I know hundreds of pastors, and I don't know any of them that use people as bad examples. But I know a lot of people who think everyone's talking about them. So that may be kind of the issue there. Last example of why I don't go to church, both my girlfriends go there. Or maybe we could say both my boyfriends go there. So that's an issue. But anyway, I'm saddened when I hear people say, I used to go to church. I used to go to church, which means at one time they sat where you're sitting now. Some time ago, they used to go to church, but they no longer go to church. And my goal this evening, my hope this evening is that I can share something with you that in a week or a month or a year or 10 years or 20 years from now, you are never among those people who say, I used to go to church. I used to go to church. Well, instead of talking about why you should go to church, I want to look at a couple of Psalms this evening, a couple of chapters in the book of Psalms that will talk about how they felt like when they went to church. So in the Old Testament, in addition to the Sabbath, and you can show that slide, in the Old Testament they had festivals. Now, most religious festivals were occasions of joy. They were times of thanking God for blessings, and they were often accompanied by singing, instrumental music, dancing, elaborate meals, and sacrifices. When I read that last line where it described all these things about they had singing and they had music and they had dancing and they had meals, the thought that came to my mind was the three words that are the values of IES: fun, food, and faith. So that looks kind of like that. Music and dancing. Anyway, but these were the festivals that they would go to, and they were required to go 3 times a year. These were called pilgrimage festivals. And 3 times a year, the males were required to go to the temple and to be a part of that worship. It was the festival of unleavened bread, which is Passover. It was the festival of weeks, or Pentecost. And it was the festival of tabernacles, which occurred at the end of the harvest when it was gathered in. And people would travel from a long ways off, and they would spend quite a bit of time getting there, but they were in place. And as they traveled to encourage themselves and to be, to help themselves along the way, they would sing songs. And those songs are in our Bible. They're called the Songs of Ascent, and they're in the book of Psalms, chapters 120 through 134. There's 15 of them. Now, there are various reasons or various ideas about why they're called the Psalms or the Songs of Ascent. And the idea is mostly that Jerusalem was on a sort of a higher elevation, and they were ascending there as they traveled, and these are songs that they sang as they went. They traveled up to the sanctuary, and they were encouraging themselves as they went along. And so I'm encouraging you tonight to think about this journey that these pilgrims, that these people on this journey to the temple, that they used to make on an annual basis 3 times a year. I'm encouraging you to think about that as like your week in microcosm, your journey this week that you went on to get to the temple tonight. Let's look at these first of 3 Psalms, and that is Psalm 120. Psalm 120 says, "In my trouble, I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? Sharp arrows of the warrior with the burning coals of the broom tree. Woe is me, for I sojourn in Meshech, and I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Too long has my soul had its dwelling with those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." So the psalmist here says that he was journeying toward the temple, and there were people around him. They lived in a culture and in a place that many times was contrary to the life that they were supposed to live as Jewish people. And he says in verse 5 there, "Woe is me, for I sojourn in Meshech, and I dwell among the tents of Kedar." Those are 2 places, 2 specific locations that geographically are kind of far apart. So he's probably not saying that I am physically with those people, but these are the kind of people I live among. And if you lived in that time and you lived in those places, you would know them to be contentious people. You would know them to be people that were difficult. You would know them to be people that would be argumentative maybe and not care about you and make it difficult for you on your journey. God's people lived in a hostile land, and there were those about them that lied about them. The first part of that chapter says, "I cried to the Lord, and God answered me." And then he says, "Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue." Now, you've probably had experiences like that yourself, where during the week you've had difficult people to deal with, and maybe even they've lied about you, or they've done something to hurt you, and it makes it difficult. As you travel on your journey towards Jerusalem, towards church, towards Sunday, you've had a difficult week. So this psalm talks about the fact that there are people around you that are going to be difficult to live with. But my encouragement to you as you go through your week and you look toward your journey to church is, don't let the circumstances of your week cause you to grow angry and cold with God. Isn't that amazing how we can do that? It's not God that's doing it, but somehow when we have a difficult week and we have problems and the people we're working with are hard to get along with, we can become angry with God about that. And we say, "God, you should have helped me," or "this happened," or, "and you put me here." And we turn that difficulty we're having with our life and with people, we turn that anger toward God. And we decide, well, I'm just not going to go to church because I'm kind of upset with God. But don't let God become the enemy. Don't let God become that problem. The biggest mistake we can make is projecting the problems of the week on God. That's it. You have a tough week? Confess it to God. Didn't go the way you wanted? Confess it to God. You feel like God should have been better to you? Tell God about it. Use your week as a way to confess and talk to God and ask God for help. Don't let that store up in you so that all week long you carry that with you and you get to the weekend and you just decide, I'm not going to church. You know, God, I'm going to show you. I'm not going to church. So the psalmist said as he journeyed towards Jerusalem, there are difficult people in my life, but I am not going to let those difficult people keep me from serving God. Keep me from being in God's house. Psalm 121, the next psalm in the Songs of Ascents, says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From whence shall my help come? That's the question. I'm lifting up my eyes to the mountains. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper, and the Lord is your shade on your right hand, and the sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your going in from this time forth and forevermore. Now remember, they're on this journey, and they're going through a difficult place with difficult people. And these people, as they go, are singing so that they will be encouraged on their journey. And they say, as they sing, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? And they answer themselves, my help comes from God. Recognize that the trials of the week are allowed by God sometimes to help us. You just saw on that promotional by Rick Warren, he says, you don't grow. I like what he said. You don't grow in the mountains, you grow in the valleys. And I wish it were true that all of the good, and we learn from our good experiences, I'm sure of that, but we learn most often when we're going through times of difficulty. And that's kind of like what James says. James in the book of James in chapter 1, verse 2, he says, count it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. My impression of James is that he was a rather serious, sullen guy. And for him to say, count it all joy, you know, it sounds a bit like hyperbole to me, a little bit exaggerated for him. But he does say, count it all joy when you encounter various trials. Why? Because you grow in that trial. Count it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces something good in you. It produces endurance. Don't you know that the people in this time, as they traveled, as they were weary, needed endurance? And when difficulty came and they needed help, they looked to God. They said, God, help me. Count it all joy. Can you do that? Can you do, if you do that, and you get to Sunday and you get to church on the weekend, remember, your week is a microcosm of this journey. And you're journeying through your week and you're having a problem, and it's not, and again, you can become angry with God, and you can say, God, I thought you loved me. I thought you would do this for me, or you would do that for me. These people said, when we have a problem, I'm going to look to where my help comes from. My help comes from God. God is not the author of your problems, but he can help you to grow in those problems. So don't let the trials of your week cause you to lose trust in God. I chose this translation because I read it a lot, and I like the way it said it because at least 4 times in this chapter, the word keeper appears in this psalm. Verse 3, he says, he will not allow your foot to slip. He will keep. He who keeps you will not slumber. Isn't that a great picture of God? I have children that when, they're old now, but when they were young, I got a grandson who just got his driver's license, so that's been a long time. Anyway, but when my kids were young, at about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or whenever, when they were sleeping, this didn't happen when they were 6 months old or, a year old, because they were not sleeping at night all the time. But when they were sleeping, we would go in and we would look at them. And, there's almost nothing better than looking at your kid when he's lying in bed there sleeping. You just love him. and you're watching over them and you're protecting them. And I get that impression of God that this kind of is like that. This says that God will keep you and he never sleeps. You don't have to worry that God knows what your week is like. He knows. And it goes on to say in verse 4, behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. God's not asleep. God's not taking a day off. God's not saying, oh, I missed that one, sorry. God's there. He knows what's going on in your life, and he is your keeper. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. I don't care if it's in the morning or in the evening, God's going to protect you. The Lord will protect you from all evil. This is the one I love the most. He will keep your soul. God is your keeper. Keep your eyes on the keeper, not on the problem. Keep your eyes on God. So they're journeying on, and we get to Psalm 122. This psalm says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing within the gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, that is built as a city that is compact together, to which the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord, an ordinance of Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For their thrones were set for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Israel, of Jerusalem. Pray they prosper who love you. May they prosper who love you. May peace be within your walls, and may prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will now say, may peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your God. The trials of the traveler in chapter 120 and the difficulties and hazards of the travelers in chapter 121 now give way to the joy of arrival. Have you ever felt that way? You've been on a long journey. You've been anticipating getting somewhere. It's cost you something to get there, but now you're there. And that's what this psalmist says. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Have you ever felt that way when you get back from a trip and you get off the plane? And here in Indonesia, I get off the plane and I go to the immigration line. And there's a sign there that says foreigners or something. I don't remember what it says, but you ain't Indonesians is what it says. And then there's another one that says citizens. And every time I see that, I think to myself, it must be good to be a citizen here. It must be good to be a citizen of Indonesia. I'm home. I've been on a long trip. It's been a difficult time, but I'm home. Have you ever felt that way? I feel that way when I go to America. I mean, we got a lot of problems. There's a lot of difficulties. But when we land and I go through immigration, I always feel like, wow, it's good to be home. I know a lot of people here. I like these people. And, so anyway, that's kind of the feeling that I think that is said here, that they have been on a trip, and all of these feelings of discomfort and problems are giving way to the joy of being there. And so, again, your week is a microcosm of this trip. Maybe you've had a long week. Maybe you've had a difficult time. Maybe it's been not so fun for you. But I hope and I pray that after a long, difficult week, you will still get up on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, but for your case, a Saturday morning, and you will say, I was glad when I woke up this morning and my wife said to me, hey, let's go to church. I was glad when I woke up today and they said, let's go to the house of the Lord. Is that how you feel inside? I feel that way. I'm happy to get up and go to church. Not because it's my job. I did that for a lot of years, several years, before it was ever my job to be pastor and to be in a church. So I like going to church. It's Sunday. Let's go to the house of the Lord. And so I'm going to tell you what might help you to be even more productive, to have an even better experience as you journey through the week and as you come to the house of God. Okay, so we've seen in chapter 1 that there are people out there in your life that mean you harm and that will not make your life easy. And the wrong response to that is you get angry with God about those people. It wasn't God that did those things. And so make sure you don't do that. You journey on a little further and you know that, well, there are hard times out here and trials. And my best thing to do is keep my eyes on God. So through the week, when you're tempted to get sidetracked and see other things and do other things, keep your eyes on God. And then this last part is that when it's time to go to church, go to church. And I'm going to give you a little hint as to how you can get more out of it. Prepare your heart, prepare your mind, prepare your soul, even before you come. Does that make sense? When I was in all those classes that it took to get that degree, there were times when I would read the material, the advanced information I was supposed to read, a lot of reading, and there were times when I read it all, and when I came to class and they lectured on that material, it made sense. It was a good lecture. I understood it. Don't tell my instructors this, but there were times when I didn't do all the reading. There were times when I wasn't prepared. And I came to class, and sometimes that instructor didn't know what he was talking about. No, it wasn't the instructor, was it? It was me. I wasn't prepared. When I was prepared, the lecture made a lot more sense. I'm just saying to you, if you've had a difficult week, take an hour, take 30 minutes, take 10 minutes before you come to church and sit down by yourself and have a discussion with God and say, God, it's been a tough week. God, there are people out there that lied about me. God, and you can just tell God whatever you want. But make sure that you spend some time getting your spirit and getting your soul and getting your mind ready for worship, ready for being in God's house. That will make the journey way, way better, even better. So in conclusion, 2 things. Number 1, never, ever, ever, never stop going to church. Now, I know someone's out there saying, oh, well, what about on vacation? Or what about, I'm not talking about you got to be out of church for a week. I'm talking about a habitual habit that develops where you don't attend church. So that's conclusion number 1. Never, ever, ever. Just make a decision. I'm never going to stop going to church. I'll tell you a little confession about me. And that is, in my 40-plus years of being a Christian, there have been times when I haven't always done what I should do. There have been stretches in my Christian life where I didn't read the Bible as much as I thought I should. And there have been stretches in my life where I didn't pray. And there have been stretches in my life where I didn't do a lot of the Christian disciplines that I know I should do. But one thing I have never, ever, ever done is stop going to church. Why? Because there are people there. Those people can help me. Because when I go to church and I'm not feeling bad and the journey's been hard and people have lied about me and it's not fun, when I go to church, there are people there who love me, people there who encourage me. And my spirit may be low, but their spirits lift me up. And I get to worship and sing with them, and they help me and they encourage me. I don't think you're going to get too far from where God is if you just make a decision, I'm never, ever, never going to stop going to church. Or let me put that in the positive, I'm always going to go to church. When my life was at its darkest, when I didn't understand things, and when there was no one in my house, not even my wife who had passed away, to say, David, get up and go to church. And there were a lot of times in that period I didn't feel like going. Because I know when I got there, people were going to say, oh, how you doing? And I just wasn't ready for it. But I never, ever, never, ever stopped going to church. That'll help you. The second thing in conclusion is always prepare your heart on the way. It'll make the journey easier, and it will make the experience in church that much better.